You've been worshipping the god of approval, not knowing that every time you hesitate, every time you shrink back, you offer a piece of your soul on the altar of fear, and in doing so you destroy the man or woman you were destined to become, not because you weren't capable, but because you were afraid of looking stupid. In the vast theater of human consciousness, one of the most insidious and elusive tyrants is not external persecution or physical limitation, but the internalized fear of humiliation, of appearing foolish, of being laughed at by the invisible tribunal we call others. We do not realize that this fear is not merely a modern social anxiety, it is archetypal. It is a psychological echo embedded deep within the shadow of the collective unconscious. It is the primal fear of exile from the tribe, of being cast out into the wilderness alone, stripped of identity. Ridiculed and forgotten. For our ancestors, such rejection meant death. But today we carry that evolutionary residue in our minds like a parasite that hijacks our potential, and it is this parasite that keeps you silent when you should speak, passive when you should act, hidden when you should shine. To look stupid, to be wrong, clumsy, awkward, or misunderstood is to confront one's own inadequacies in public, and because the ego seeks validation and superiority, it reacts to this prospect with horror, so you numb yourself, self-sabotage, overthink, you rehearse life instead of living it. All because some imaginary audience might frown or laugh. But here's what you must understand. The process of becoming who you truly are will demand that you look foolish. Many times, the act of self-actualization is not polished. It is messy, chaotic, and often embarrassing. The hero's journey begins in discomfort, not applause. When you fear looking stupid, you unconsciously place your destiny in the hands of the crowd. You become a performer, not a creator, and what is more tragic than a soul that could have birthed empires but settled for mimicry? There are millions who will never write their book, speak their truth, start their business, or pursue their purpose, not because they lack talent or calling, but because they are mortally afraid of temporary ridicule. But what if the fear itself was the teacher? What if every moment of public discomfort was the sacred fire in which the false self burns, revealing the gold of your authentic being? Carl Jung once said, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." I would add, a man who has not been willing to be laughed at, misunderstood, or dismissed has never truly begun the process of becoming himself. In this speech we will go deep, not with superficial encouragement or hollow motivation, but with the brutal clarity of shadow work. We will confront the 5 psychological pillars behind this fear, and we will dismantle them one by one. So if you've ever stayed silent, shrunk down, or abandoned a dream because you feared looking like a fool, this is for you. In the ancient symbology of archetypes, the fool is often mistaken as a weak or pitiful character, someone at the margins of society, laughed at, dismissed, not to be taken seriously. But that perception is a shallow misunderstanding of what the fool truly represents within the psyche. The fool is not a fool in the derogatory sense. The fool is a symbol of pure potential, of the one who dares to step into the unknown with empty hands and an open heart. In Carl Jung's view, the archetypes that populate our unconscious are not merely stories or ideas, but living patterns of behavior that exist within every individual, and the fool, paradoxically, may be the most courageous of all. Why? Because the fool does something that almost no other archetype is willing to do: risk humiliation for the sake of transformation. The fool is laughed at not because he is stupid, but because he is unafraid to look stupid. He steps forward before he knows the path. He speaks before he has mastered the language. He acts before he is assured of success. In the tarot, the fool stands at the beginning of journey numbered 0, the void, the sacred nothingness that contains all things. He carries a small satchel, representing that he takes nothing with him except trust. He's stepping off a cliff, yet smiling, not because he is reckless, but because he understands a truth most do not. You must risk it. Falling to rise, what we call looking stupid, is often the visible face of growth. When you first start anything meaningful, whether it's public speaking, starting a business, learning a new skill, changing your life's direction, you will at some point look awkward, naive, or wrong. That discomfort is not the sign you're failing, it's the sign you've finally left the safe confines of your ego's approval. seeking prison, and entered the alchemical fire of becoming. But the ego fears the fool, it despises looking amateur, it cannot tolerate being the beginner, the one who asks dumb questions, the one who makes mistakes publicly, because the ego's deepest need is to be seen as competent and admired, and anything that threatens that image, even if it's required for your evolution, is avoided. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming the self, a psychological integration of the conscious and unconscious realms, but he also warned that this process would dismantle the persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted, and herein lies the danger. If your identity is built entirely on being seen as smart, capable, and approved of, you will never allow yourself to go where you haven't yet mastered. You'll cling to what's known, you'll plateau, you'll rot while still breathing. Every master was once a fool. Every expert began as a novice. Every wise man was once a child with a stutter and shaky legs. The difference between the fulfilled and the frustrated is not genius, it is willingness, a willingness to fall, to stumble, to look stupid, and to keep going anyway. Now let us go deeper. In Jungian thought, when the fool appears in your psychic landscape, it is not random, it's a calling. It means that some part of your being is ready to grow, but the persona you've built won't allow the risk. The fool is the crack in the facade. The fool says, leave your certainty, step into the unknown, look ridiculous. Let them laugh, because the fool knows the moment you are no longer afraid of embarrassment, you become invincible. Let me say that again. The moment you are no longer afraid of embarrassment, you become invincible. Embarrassment is a social death, but beyond that death is psychological freedom. When you finally let go of the fear of looking stupid, you unlock the freedom to pursue mastery. You no longer need to impress others, you only need to improve. You're no longer performing, you're transforming. It is no coincidence that many of the greatest thinkers, creators, and innovators of history were once ridiculed. Galileo was mocked, Nietzsche was ostracized, Jung himself was cast out of Freud's inner circle when he dared to challenge the orthodoxy, but none of them were afraid of looking foolish, because they were loyal not to approval but to truth. Now imagine what could become of you if you let go of the fear that keeps your potential in chains, if you allowed yourself to ask the dumb questions, to make the awkward first attempt, to publish your first terrible video, to speak your truth with shaking hands. That's where power lies, not in the polished image of success, but in the raw courage of the first step. You cannot skip the fool phase. If you do, you skip the very initiations that carve your character and unlock your brilliance. You must earn your confidence by being humbled. You must earn your wisdom by looking like a beginner. But here's the beauty. Once you embrace the fool, he transforms. The same archetype that once felt embarrassing becomes empowering, and eventually the fool becomes the magician, one who no longer fears perception because he understands reality. In truth, there are only two kinds of people in this world. One, those who fear looking stupid and stay stuck forever. Two, and those who accept looking stupid as the first step toward greatness. So I ask you this: what dreams are you holding hostage because you're scared of looking ridiculous? And how much longer will you delay your evolution just to protect illusion? In the framework of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, no concept is more central to understanding your inner conflict than the distinction between the persona and the self. To live in alignment with your true nature, to experience wholeness and authenticity, you must confront the painful truth of how much of your identity has been crafted for survival, not for truth. Let's begin with clarity. The persona is the mask. It's the face you wear to meet the world. It is adaptive, socially constructed, and highly conditioned by the expectations of others. Family, society, friends, culture. You create your persona to be accepted, to be liked, to be safe. It is your social armor, but the danger is this: if you believe the mask is who you really are, you lose contact with the self, the deep, undivided wholeness that lies beneath. You do not wear just one mask, you wear many. At work, you wear the competent professional. With family, you play the dutiful son or daughter. With strangers, perhaps you project confidence while hiding your anxiety. With lovers, you might perform charm while suppressing vulnerability. These masks are not necessarily evil. They are tools, but tools become Prisons when we forget we're the one holding them. You become trapped in your persona when you start living for approval rather than from authenticity. The tragedy is that most people never meet their true self. They live their entire lives as a performance. They are imprisoned in the desire to be liked, to be admired, to be safe from rejection, and so they edit themselves endlessly, hiding their true thoughts, stifling their curiosity, muting their voice. This is why you are afraid to be seen, because to be seen as you truly are means removing the mask, and removing the mask feels like death. Why? Because from a young age you were taught who you really are is not acceptable. Maybe it was your sensitivity, maybe it was your anger, maybe your creativity was called weird, maybe your assertiveness was labeled too much, so you adapted, you buried what was real, you presented what was rewarded. Over time. The true self faded beneath layers of acceptable performances, but the unconscious never forgets the self. The whole of you does not die. Even when denied, it waits, it whispers, sometimes it screams through depression, anxiety, rage, or inexplicable emptiness. These symptoms are not your enemy, they are your psyche trying to tell you the life you are living is not your own. Jung warned that identification with the persona leads to spiritual stagnation. You become what the world wants, but you lose the one thing that matters, your soul, and here is the paradox. The more you seek validation through the persona, the more hollow your life feels. Applause does not satisfy, likes do not heal, praise only deepens the ache, because it is not the real you being loved, it is the mask. This is why people with seemingly perfect lives, wealth, beauty, fame often collapse into despair, because what they built was not true. They climbed the ladder of success wearing a mask, and when they reached the top, they found nothing waiting. The persona succeeded, but the self starved. So what must be done? You must go inward. You must begin the individuation process. Courageous journey of peeling away the false layers and reclaiming the rejected parts of yourself. This is not a casual self-help tip. It is a full-scale psychological death and rebirth. You will grieve identities you once clung to. You will face shadows you've denied. You will lose people who only loved your mask, but in return you will find something sacred, yourself. To individuate is to become whole, not perfect. Wholeness includes light and shadow. It means embracing your strength and your wounds, your joy and your grief, your brilliance and your darkness. It means saying, this is who I am, not what I perform, not what I pretend, but what I am when no one is watching. And here lies the ultimate liberation. When you are no longer afraid to be seen as you are finally free. Free to speak your truth, not just what's polite. Free to create from your soul, not just for applause. Free to walk away from what dishonored you without fear of losing approval. But the path to that freedom demands sacrifice. You must kill your addiction to being liked. You must face rejection not as failure, but as purification. You must allow the false self to die so the true self can be born. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but few claim that privilege because the price is steep. It requires radical honesty, it demands courage, and most terrifying of all, it demands that you stop hiding. So I ask you, what mask are you wearing today? Who taught you that the real you wasn't enough? And how much longer will you trade your truth for acceptance? Because the longer you wear the mask, the heavier it becomes. Eventually, it suffocates you. Not all prisons have bars. Some are built from smiles, politeness, and quiet desperation. But here's the secret. When you finally take the risk, be seen to be fully, brutally, nakedly seen, something magical happens. Those who truly resonate with your soul will find you, and those who only love the mask will fall away. You will no longer be surrounded by admirers. You will be surrounded by mirrors, people who reflect your truth back to you. People who don't want your performance, they want your presence. That is what the self longs for, not applause, but recognition. So let go, drop the act, tear the mask, it's time. Your soul is not interested in your reputation. It is interested in your realization. We live in a culture that worships comfort. Everywhere you turn, comfort is sold as the ultimate goal. Ease, pleasure, convenience, safety. But Carl Jung would have seen this obsession for what it truly is, a collective defense against the reality of transformation. Because transformation, in its truest sense, is violent to the ego. It demands confrontation with discomfort, not escape from it, and this is the great spiritual paradox. What truly heals you will not feel comfortable, What awakens your soul will not come gently. Let's begin with an uncomfortable truth, the very parts of your life that you are desperate. Change. Your anxiety, your anger, your addictions, your emptiness are not problems to be numbed. They are messages. They are signals from the unconscious warning you that the structure you have built, the life, the identity, the routines, the beliefs are too small for the truth of who you are becoming, and when that structure becomes too small, it must crack. This is the birth of transformation. In Jungian psychology, this is the moment the ego encounters the self, the deep, primordial, transpersonal center of your psyche that contains all your unlived potential. The ego wants control. The self wants expansion, and when those two collide, the ego suffers. It hurts, but this suffering is not senseless. It is the fire that burns away the false so that the real can emerge. This is why true growth feels like death, because a part of you is dying. Your illusions, your comforts, your stories, your defenses. Transformation is not some tidy process. It is brutal, it is raw, it is often humiliating. It breaks your pride, it exposes your shadows, it dissolves the life you thought you wanted, and the ego resists with everything it has. This resistance shows up in subtle ways. Procrastination, denial, rationalization, spiritual bypassing. You say things like, "I'll start next week," "This isn't the right time," or "Maybe I'm just not meant for more." But these are not truths. They are protections. Protections the ego builds to avoid the one thing that leads to real growth. Pain. Jung said there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And if you truly wish to awaken, to step into your wholeness, you must stop avoiding pain and begin walking toward it. Not recklessly, but consciously. You must make the discomfort sacred. You must understand that every moment of resistance, every uncomfortable feeling, every unsettling realization is part of the alchemical process of becoming who you really are. Comfort, on the other hand, is the great narcotic. It lulls you into complacency. It seduces you into routines that keep you small. It convinces you that the known is safer than the unknown. But here is the great tragedy. Nothing grows in comfort. Your strength, your creativity, your wisdom, your depth, they are all forged in discomfort, in the fire, in the storm, in the wilderness of the unknown. This is why your soul is not interested in making you comfortable. It is interested in making you conscious. The unconscious will often create chaos in your life, not to destroy you, but to disrupt the illusion that you are in control. It will orchestrate breakdowns, loss, betrayal, depression, not as punishments, but as initiations, because something in you must break for something new to emerge. The false must fall, and it rarely falls without a fight. So ask yourself, what are you clinging to for comfort that is keeping you from transformation? Is it the relationship that no longer aligns but feels familiar, the job that drains your soul but pays the bills, the identity that no longer fits but feels safe, the belief system you inherited but never questioned? All of these are comfort zones, and every comfort zone, if clung to long enough, becomes a coffin. The only way out is through. You must learn to sit with discomfort. Invite it to listen to it, because discomfort is the language of your deeper self saying, it is time to evolve. But make no mistake, this process is terrifying. It will feel like disintegration, and in a way it is. You are disintegrating the parts of you that were built from fear, the personas, the coping mechanisms, the limiting beliefs. You are returning to the essential, and that requires dismantling everything inessential. This is the real meaning of the dark night of the soul, a sacred descent into the underworld of your own psyche, not to be destroyed, but to be purified. And here's the deeper truth: the more you resist discomfort, the more you suffer, but the more you embrace it as a teacher, the more it transforms you. When you stop asking, "How do I escape this pain?" and start asking, "What is this pain trying to teach me?" you shift from victim to seeker, from avoidance to awakening, from surface to soul. Your pain has a purpose. Your discomfort has intelligence. Your chaos has order hidden within it. But you must trust the process. You must walk through the fire with your eyes open, knowing that everything that burns away was never truly you. The ancient alchemists had a phrase, solve et coagula, dissolve and reconstitute. This is the essence of transformation. You must dissolve the old form before the new one can emerge, and that dissolution hurts. It tears at the fabric of your known self. But when Pain is complete when the ego has been cracked open. Something radiant emerges, clarity, strength, power, purpose. You become reborn, not as someone else, but as more fully yourself. So stop chasing comfort, stop fearing discomfort, start asking the deeper question, what is my discomfort calling me to become? Because the life you want, the freedom, the purpose, the depth, the meaning, it is not found in the safety of the known. It is hidden in the fire of the unknown, and if you are brave enough to walk through it, not around it, not above it, not beneath it, but through it, you will discover a version of yourself that is not merely improved, but transformed, not merely happier, but whole. You are not supposed to be comfortable. You are supposed to be awake. In the quiet spaces between your thoughts, beneath the persona you wear in public, lies something ancient, raw, and unsettling. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the parts of your psyche you've disowned, denied, repressed, or deemed unworthy. It is everything about yourself you were taught to hide to be accepted. It is your unspoken rage, your taboo desires, your primal impulses, your envy, your arrogance, your vulnerability. But let this truth sink in. What you refuse to face within yourself will not vanish. It will rule you from the dark. This is the terrifying paradox of the psyche. The more you deny your shadow, the more power it has over your life. It will seep through your actions, distort your relationships, sabotage your dreams, and manifest as projection, addiction, emotional reactivity, and blind spots. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that is what so many do. They suffer again and again, and they blame the world. But the world is merely a mirror. It reflects what you are unwilling to see. You think your anger is about what others do. You think your anxiety is because of your environment. You think your jealousy is caused by someone else's success. But in truth, these are reflections of a shadow aspect you have refused to meet. The trigger is not out there. The trigger is a torch, pointing to the part of your psyche that is starving to be seen. And here is where the pain begins. To integrate the shadow is not to tame it or destroy it. It is to confront it. It is to go willingly into the cave you feared. Enter, knowing that the very parts of yourself you have rejected hold the keys to your wholeness. This is not an abstract idea. It is a psychological necessity, because what remains repressed will always resurface, not in the form of neat insight, but as emotional volatility, inner emptiness, or compulsive behaviors that seem to defy your conscious will. Look closely at your life. Where do you lose control? What triggers erupt from you without warning? What do you judge most fiercely in others? What do you envy, mock, or avoid at all costs? These are clues. These are the breadcrumbs that lead you into the hidden corners of your psyche. If you hate arrogance in others, it may be because you've disowned your own sense of power. If you fear emotional intimacy, it may be because your vulnerability was shamed. If you find yourself constantly needing validation, it may be because you've buried your sense of self-worth in your unconscious. Jung taught that each person has a personal shadow, and if left unconscious, it can merge with the collective shadow. The cultural, tribal, and societal evils we commit as a group when individuals fail to take responsibility for their inner darkness, wars, prejudice, witch hunts, and mass manipulation. These are the shadows of civilizations where individuals remain blind to their own capacity for darkness. But integration is not an intellectual task. You cannot journal or meditate your way to wholeness alone. You must wrestle. You must confess to yourself first the darkest truths of who you are, not to shame yourself, but to reclaim power. The shadow contains vital energy, libido, instinct, charisma, creative genius, sexuality, assertiveness. All of these are stored in the shadow when denied, and this is why people feel lifeless, apathetic, or uninspired, because their power is locked in a dungeon inside their psyche. The process begins with radical honesty. You must admit your shadow to yourself in full. Yes, you have violent thoughts. Yes, you sometimes want to be worshipped. Yes, you envy. Yes, you lie. These truths do not make you evil, they make you human. What makes people dangerous is not the presence of a shadow. It is their denial of it. This is the root of hypocrisy. The man who rails against immorality yet secretly abuses power. The woman who presents spiritual purity but manipulates behind the scenes. These people are not evil, they are fragmented. Their shadow acts out through their unconscious because it was never acknowledged with conscious awareness. When you integrate the shadow, you begin to act with conscious choice. The power it once had to control you weakens because now you are in dialogue with it. You no longer run from your darkness. You stand in it not as a slave, but as a sovereign. The process is ongoing. The shadow is not a one-time confrontation. It evolves as you do. New layers emerge as you step into higher versions of yourself. Each level of growth reveals a deeper level of unconsciousness, and this is the humility of true individuation. You never arrive, you deepen. To live without integrating your shadow is to live half a life. You may appear good, moral, respectable, but your soul will feel starved. You will unconsciously seek your missing vitality in others, falling into codependence, projection, or resentment. Because what you have disowned, you will try to find in others. This is why people fall in love with those who express their shadow, the wild artist, the confident leader, the seductive lover. They do not just admire them, they seek to reclaim through relationship what they lack in integration. But integration cannot be outsourced. It must be earned, fought for, wept over. It requires descending into the psyche like a miner, torch in hand, looking not for monsters to slay, but parts of the self long forgotten. The moment you meet your rage and hold it without shame, it becomes power. The moment you meet your envy and explore its roots, it becomes clarity. The moment you meet your fear and stay with it, it becomes wisdom. There is no wholeness without shadow work. There is no enlightenment without descent. Jung wrote, "Enlightenment is not imagining figures of light, but making the darkness conscious. That is the task, that is the invitation, that is the price of true freedom. So look into the mirror, not the one that flatters, but the one that reflects your inner world. Ask, what part of me have I not accepted? What truth am I afraid to admit? What feeling do I suppress out of fear it will destroy me?" The answer is your map. Because the shadow you do not integrate will control you not openly, but in whispers, in impulses, in projections, in fears that shape your destiny. But the shadow you integrate becomes your ally. It sharpens your discernment, it expands your empathy, it deepens your presence, it frees your soul. You do not become good by denying your darkness, you become whole by embracing it. We spend much of our lives trying to escape pain. We numb, avoid, suppress, distract. But in Jungian psychology, the wound is not an interruption of the path. It is the path. The greatest and most important problems of life, Jung wrote, are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved but only outgrown, and the way we outgrow them is not by fleeing our suffering, but by turning toward it, by facing the exact place where we were broken and discovering there not our ruin but our redemption. This is not a romantic idea. It is brutal because real. Healing requires confrontation with raw, unfiltered pain. The child who was neglected must face the hollow echo of being unseen. The person betrayed must stare into the abyss of violated trust. The one who was shamed must revisit the furnace of humiliation. These are not just memories, they are psychic imprints, frozen energies in the soul, and until you return to them, they will quietly dictate the shape of your life. You will form relationships that echo your wounds. You will seek careers that reenact your validation patterns. You will engage in habits, compulsions, and thought loops that are nothing more than elaborate defenses against feeling what you've buried. But wholeness cannot be built upon avoidance. It is not achieved through perfection or spiritual bypassing. Wholeness is born in the very place your psyche was fragmented. Here is the paradox. Your wound contains your wholeness. The parts of you that were split off, rejected, or shut down in response to trauma are not gone. They are waiting. They are trapped in time, and healing is the journey of returning with consciousness and compassion to that inner rupture and retrieving the exiled parts of yourself. This is shadow work at its most sacred, because it is not about just seeing the dark. It is about reclaiming what was abandoned there. Imagine your psyche as a vast landscape. Some areas are lush, bright, and cultivated. Others are charred, abandoned, covered in vines of silence and shame. Most people live only in the cultivated spaces, but the treasure lies in the ruins, in the broken parts of your story, in the memories that make your stomach tighten, in the truths you swore you'd never speak. That is where your power sleeps. That is where your aliveness waits. You do not have to revisit the past to stay in it, but you must revisit it to free the part of you that never left. The wound becomes the doorway, not because suffering is sacred in itself, but because it breaks the ego, it cracks the armor, and through that crack, something deeper can emerge, not the false self, the mask you crafted to survive, but the real self, the one forged through integration. True individuation demands you face what broke you, not to relive it endlessly, but to reclaim what was lost. The child who learned to stay silent needs to be given voice. The teenager who was told they were too much must be allowed to take up space. The adult who betrayed themselves for approval must be reminded of their inner authority. This is not therapy. This is inner alchemy. Wholeness is not a clean, linear process. It is cyclical, spiraling inward. You think you've healed only to encounter the same wound at a deeper level, but each time you meet it with more strength, more truth, more compassion. Each time a new layer is metabolized, the pain loses its grip. The trigger becomes a teacher. The scar becomes a symbol, not of defeat, but of evolution. People often ask, how do I become whole? And the answer is this: you must go to the place where you were shattered, because that's where your soul is calling from. That's where your authenticity lies buried. That's where your intuition is trapped. That's where your boundaries were first violated. That's where your power is waiting to be reclaimed. This is not a message of despair, it is a message of hope, because once you understand this principle, your suffering is no longer meaningless, it becomes sacred material. The ashes of who you were become the soil for who you are becoming. Jung often spoke of the self, not the ego, not the persona, but the totality of the psyche. The self is born through integration, and integration requires descent into your trauma, into your complexes, into your unresolved grief. This is not self-pity, it is self-reclamation, because when you touch the place where you were broken and you do not flinch, you transform. You become the adult who can hold the child. You become the witness to your own story. You become the alchemist who turns pain into purpose. And from that place, you no longer seek wholeness in others. You carry it within you. Wholeness is not about being healed. It is about being honest, honest about your pain, honest about your patterns, honest about your projections, because only when you are honest can you take full responsibility. And responsibility is the threshold of freedom. So go back. Not to stay, but to retrieve. Go back to the memory that broke you. Go back to the choice where you betrayed yourself. Go back to the relationship that taught you your needs didn't matter. And from that place, rewrite the story, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by choosing to become the one who is no longer ruled by it, because the wound is where the light enters. The crack is where the soul breathes, the pain is the invitation, and wholeness is the answer you give when you accept it fully. There is nothing wrong with being broken. What matters is what you do next. You can deny it, you can drown in it, or you can build something with it. You are not meant to be perfect. You are meant to be whole. You were never meant to remain a half-formed echo of your upbringing. You were never meant to wander this life as a fractured soul, forever carrying the weight of inherited beliefs, unhealed wounds, and borrowed identities. You were meant to be reborn again and again, through fire, through descent, through the conscious death of all that is not truly you. The self is not something you stumble upon by accident. It is carved from the bones of everything false. It is revealed only when you willingly walk into your own darkness, not to be consumed by it, but to retrieve the fragments you left behind. The process of becoming is not gentle, it is sacred. It is violent to the ego, but healing to the soul. It is death to illusion and birth to authenticity. And if you have the courage to kill who you were, who they told you to be, who you pretended to be, then what awaits on the other side is not emptiness, but wholeness, a self that is rooted, radiant, and real. You were never broken, you were only buried, and now you rise, not as the version of you that once survived, but as the one who is finally alive. This is individuation. This is transformation. This is your true becoming.